Afternoon. That bag yours?
Yes, officer. I'm about to purchase it.
About to. So you haven't paid yet?
I selected it. The associate's ringing it up.
We've had reports of theft, luxury items. You fit the description.
I fit the description.
Someone attempting to leave without paying.
I've done nothing
Then you
wrong.
won't mind putting the bag down.
Inside one of the most exclusive designer boutiques in the city, a woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong found herself cornered by a man with a badge and a bias. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't stealing. She was shopping in a cream wool coat, pearl necklace, and designer bag the same way she had done dozens of times before in that very store. But on this particular afternoon, Officer Richard Coleman walked through those glass doors without a call, without a complaint, and without a single reason except the one he would never say out loud. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And if justice matters to you, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe. Because what happens next inside this boutique is something the department never wanted you to see. The body cam recording the encounter belonged to Officer Richard Coleman, a 14-year veteran of the Maplewood Police Department, known internally for what colleagues quietly called retail sweeps. While never officially sanctioned, Coleman had developed a pattern, entering upscale stores in predominantly white neighborhoods and approaching black shoppers not because anyone had called, but because, in his own words from a prior internal review, he was maintaining the integrity of the shopping environment. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in March, Coleman was parked 2 storefronts down when he spotted her through the boutique's floor-to-ceiling windows. A black woman, alone, hands on a handbag that cost more than his monthly paycheck. He got out of his cruiser without radioing dispatch, without logging a call, without a single documented reason. He walked straight through the front door. The woman he approached was Gabrielle Hayes, age 38. A brand consultant and entrepreneur whose client roster included 3 Fortune 500 companies. She was not browsing out of curiosity. She had an appointment with the store's private client coordinator in 20 minutes. She had shopped there 11 times in the past 2 years, spending over $40,000. And in 11 minutes and 34 seconds, Officer Richard Coleman would make the most expensive mistake of his career. The alarm on Gabrielle Hayes' phone went off at 5:47 that morning, 13 minutes before it was set to ring. She was already awake. That was how she operated. Always 13 minutes ahead of the world. Always moving with the quiet precision of someone who had learned early that excellence was the only armor that never rusted. She had grown up watching her mother press her church clothes the night before, shoes already by the door. Because in their household, in their neighborhood, being late was never just being late. It was confirmation of something people already wanted to believe about you. Gabrielle had taken that lesson and built an empire around it. By 38, she had consulted for brands that most people only saw in magazines. She understood luxury not as indulgence, but as language. The weight of a leather strap, the finish on a brass clasp, the way a well-made coat moved when a woman walked with intention. She spoke that language fluently, and she had spent 15 years teaching corporations how to speak it to people who looked like her. That Tuesday, she had a 2 o'clock with the boutique's private client coordinator, a standing appointment she'd held for over a year. She was evaluating a new accessories line for a client pitch, and she had arrived 30 minutes early, the way she always did, to browse without the pressure of an agenda. She wore a cream wool coat she'd had tailored in Milan, a pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, and carried a cognac bag she'd purchased in that very store 14 months earlier. She was not out of place. She was, in every measurable sense, exactly where she was supposed to be. The boutique greeted her the way it always did: cool air, soft lighting, the faint smell of leather and white tea. A sales associate nodded from across the floor. The coordinator had left a note at the front that she'd be 5 minutes late. Gabrielle smiled, waved it off, and drifted toward the new display along the east wall, fingertips trailing the edge of a structured shoulder bag, her mind already turning over how she'd frame it in the pitch deck. She never heard the door open behind her. The first thing Gabrielle noticed was the shadow. It crossed the display case before the man did, broad, uniformed, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that wasn't casual at all. She turned, assuming it was another customer, maybe someone's husband trailing behind with no interest in handbags. But the man who stopped 3 feet behind her wasn't browsing. He wasn't even looking at the merchandise. He was looking at her. Officer Richard Coleman stood with his thumbs hooked into his belt, head slightly tilted, wearing the particular expression of a man who had already made up his mind before opening his mouth. "Excuse me, do you work here?" 4 words, innocuous on the surface, the kind of thing anyone might ask in a store. But Gabrielle Hayes had been a black woman in luxury spaces her entire adult life. She knew exactly what those 4 words meant when they came from a mouth like his, in a tone like that, with eyes that had never once glanced at the merchandise. She turned fully to face him. Unhurried, composed. "No," she said simply. "I'm a customer." Coleman's expression didn't change. His eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, from her face down to the bag in her hands, then back up. The kind of look that was designed to make a person feel like they needed to explain themselves, like their presence itself was a question that required an answer. "That bag," he said, nodding toward it. "You bring that in with you." The boutique had gone quiet in the way that spaces do, when everyone in them senses something wrong but no one is sure yet what to call it. A sales associate near the register had stopped typing. The woman at the far display had gone still. Gabrielle held his gaze. Her voice when she spoke was even and clean as a ruled line. "Yes, I purchased it here, actually, over a year ago. You have any proof of that?" And there it was, no longer disguised, no longer dressed up in the language of routine questioning. He wasn't asking if she needed help. He wasn't concerned about the merchandise. He was asking her to prove she deserved to exist in this room. Gabrielle took one slow breath. She did not look away. Gabrielle had not raised her voice. She had not moved from her spot beside the display case. She had done everything that a reasonable person in an unreasonable situation is told to do: stay calm, stay visible, give them nothing to use against you. And still, Coleman took a step closer. "The items you're currently holding," he said, his voice dropping into the register of false authority, not quite a bark, but not a request either. "I'm gonna need to see proof of purchase." Gabrielle looked down at the bag in her hands, the one she had picked up from the display approximately 4 minutes ago, the one that was still attached to its store tag, the one that was, by every legal and logical definition, the property of the boutique she was standing inside, a boutique that had not yet sold it to anyone. "This item is still on the shelf," she said, each word precise and unhurried. "I haven't purchased it. No one has. It belongs to the store." Coleman didn't blink. "Then I'm going to need you to set it down and step away from the display." The air in the room had changed completely now. 2 customers near the entrance had stopped pretending to browse. The sales associate by the register, a young woman named Priya, who had greeted Gabrielle warmly less than 20 minutes ago, stood with her hand frozen above her keyboard, eyes darting between Coleman and her manager's closed office door. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The boutique, which had been designed to feel like sanctuary, now felt like a holding room. This was the moment, the one that comes in every confrontation like this, where the people nearby must decide whether their discomfort is enough to make them act. Most of the time, it isn't. Most of the time, silence wins. Priya looked at the floor. The other customers found sudden interest in things across the room. And Coleman, reading the silence exactly the way men like him are trained to read it, took it as permission to continue. He pulled out a small notepad, clicked his pen, looked at Gabrielle the way a person looks at paperwork, rather than a person. "Name," he said. Gabrielle straightened her spine to its full height. "Gabrielle Hayes," she said, "and I'd like to know yours." Coleman didn't answer her question. He wrote something in his notepad instead, slowly, with the performance of a man who wanted her to understand that her question didn't matter, that she didn't set the terms here. He clicked the pen closed, slid the pad back into his breast pocket, and looked at her with the flat, bureaucratic patience of someone who had done this before and never once been told to stop. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to come with me." "Come with you where?" "Outside. We can finish this conversation on the sidewalk." Gabrielle didn't move. "I'm not going outside. I'm a customer in a private store. I've broken no law, and you have given me no legal reason to go anywhere with you." Something shifted behind Coleman's eyes. Not rage exactly, but the particular irritation of a man unaccustomed to a woman who knew the difference between a request and a right. He took one step forward, then another, and then he did it. His hand came up, open-palmed, angled toward her elbow, the universal gesture of a man who has decided that his will outweighs another person's body. Gabrielle stepped back. It was not a stumble. It was not fear. It was a single deliberate step, controlled and clear, that put exactly 18 inches between his hand and her arm. She looked down at the space between them, then back up at his face, and her expression said everything her voice didn't have to. "Don't." The room stopped breathing. The customer by the silk scarves took a half step backward. Priya's hand came off the keyboard entirely. Somewhere near the back, a hanger scraped against a rack, and the sound cut through the silence like something breaking. Coleman's hand hung in the air for one long second, suspended in the gap between what he intended and what he now understood was being witnessed. His body cam was recording. The store's security cameras were recording. And every person standing in that boutique was now a witness to a man in uniform, reaching for a woman who had committed no crime, broken no law, and given him no cause. He lowered his hand, but he did not step back. And Gabrielle Hayes did not step back either. The office door opened. It didn't swing dramatically. There was no cinematic timing to it, just a soft click, a rectangle of warmer light, and then Diane Forsyth, the boutique's senior client manager, stepping onto the sales floor with a tablet under her arm and an expression that told everyone in the room she had heard enough through that door to know exactly what she was walking into. Diane was 61 years old, had managed luxury retail for 34 of them, and had the particular composure of a woman who had spent 3 decades making wealthy people feel comfortable and difficult people feel managed. She looked at Coleman once, a full, unhurried assessment, and then walked directly to Gabrielle. "Ms. Hayes," her voice was warm and deliberate. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. I have the new collection pulled for you in the back." She turned to Coleman with the kind of professional smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "Officer, is there something I can help you with?" Coleman straightened. "I'm responding to a concern about merchandise." "What concern?" Diane asked. "No one from this store contacted the police. I observed a situation that warranted." "Ms. Hayes," Diane said, cutting through him cleanly, "is one of our most valued private clients. She has a scheduled appointment with me this afternoon. She has shopped with us for over 2 years." She lifted her tablet, turned the screen toward him briefly. "Purchase history, appointment log, client profile. Is there anything else you need to see?" The store held its breath. This was the moment reasonable men stood down. The moment the file closes, the notepad goes away, and someone manufactures a graceful exit. Every person in that boutique understood it. Coleman understood it too. He looked at the tablet, then at Gabrielle, then back at Diane. "I still have questions for the customer," he said. Diane's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. "The customer," she said quietly, "has an appointment, and this is private property." Coleman clicked his pen open again, as if Diane hadn't spoken, as if the tablet didn't exist, as if 2 years of purchase history and a standing appointment were nothing more than an inconvenience to be noted and set aside. Gabrielle watched him write and felt something crystallize inside her chest. This was no longer about a handbag. The department released the footage on a Thursday morning, buried inside a routine transparency report, posted to their website at 7:43 a.m., the kind of timestamp that suggests someone hoped it would land quietly, get skimmed by a journalist or two, and dissolve into the weekly news cycle before anyone had the chance to feel anything about it. It took 11 minutes for the clip to reach Twitter. 19 minutes after that, it was on Reddit. By noon, 3 separate YouTube channels had uploaded the full 11 minutes and 34 seconds, with their own titles, their own thumbnails, their own breathless captions. But no amount of framing changed what the footage actually showed, because bodycam footage, at its most powerful, is mercilessly indifferent to spin. It showed Coleman entering the boutique without hesitation, without a radio call, without pause. It showed him approaching a woman who was browsing quietly, her back to the door, completely unaware. It showed his opening line, his tilted head, the slow, deliberate sweep of his eyes from her face to the bag in her hands and back again. It showed him demanding proof of purchase for an item that still had a store tag on it. It showed his hand, rising, reaching, moving toward her elbow, and it showed her step back, measured, dignified, unbroken, and it showed him continuing anyway, notepad open, pen clicking, long after Diane Forsyth had confirmed everything that should have ended the encounter within 60 seconds of it beginning. The internet did not need long. By 2 p.m., someone had identified Coleman's badge number from a single paused frame. By 4 p.m., his full name, precinct, and service record had been compiled into a thread that had been shared 80,000 times. By evening, 3 women had come forward in the comments, separately, without coordination, each describing a nearly identical encounter with the same officer in the same shopping district over the previous 18 months. None of them had filed reports. Each of them said the same thing when asked why. "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me." The footage ran on the evening news in 4 cities that night. A civil rights attorney in the 3rd segment looked directly into the camera and said what everyone watching had already been thinking for hours. "This is not a mistake. This is a pattern." The million-view mark hit at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday, the quiet hours when most of the country was asleep and the internet belonged entirely to the people who couldn't be. By sunrise, it had crossed 3 million. What happened next was the thing that separates a viral moment from a movement. The stories started coming. Not from journalists, not from advocates or attorneys, or anyone with an agenda and a platform. They came from women, black women, specifically, typing from their phones in the early morning dark, in break rooms and parking lots and kitchen tables, reaching back into their own memories and pulling out the moments they had never quite known what to do with. A woman in Atlanta described being followed through a department store by a security guard while her white colleague browsed the same floor unaccompanied. A woman in Chicago wrote about being asked, twice if she was sure she could afford a coat she had already decided to purchase. A woman in London, shared a receipt she had started keeping photographs of after a shop assistant in Mayfair asked her to hold on just a moment before allowing her to try on jewelry. The hashtag appeared sometime around 3 a.m. No one could trace who started it. Within 6 hours, it was the second trending topic in the United States. Within 12, it had crossed into the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Nigeria. By the end of the first day, it carried over 400,000 posts, and that number climbed for 6 consecutive days without a single moment of plateau. What struck observers wasn't the anger, though the anger was present and it was earned. What struck them was the precision. These women weren't venting. They were documenting dates, locations, store names, descriptions of the employees involved, post after post, written with the careful specificity of people who had long suspected that one day someone might finally ask. Gabrielle's name trended separately, not as a victim, but as a verb. Gabrielle hazed him, became shorthand for holding your ground with grace when the room expects you to collapse. She was not on social media that weekend. She was with her attorney. Because while the world was watching the footage, Gabrielle Hayes was building something with it, something that would cost Officer Richard Coleman and the city that employed him a great deal more than embarrassment. The internal affairs file on Officer Richard Coleman was opened on a Monday morning, not because the department had suddenly developed a conscience, but because by Monday morning they had no other viable option. The chief of police had spent the weekend fielding calls from the mayor's office, from the city council, from 2 state legislators whose constituents had been flooding their inboxes since Friday, from a federal civil rights liaison who used the word pattern 3 times in a 4-minute conversation and didn't sound like she was using it casually. By the time the chief sat down at his desk that Monday, the decision had already been made by the weight of everything pressing down on it. Internal Affairs wasn't investigating because they wanted to. They were investigating because the alternative was worse. What they found, once they started looking, had been there the entire time. 3 prior complaints. 3 separate incidents, filed by 3 different women, in 3 different retail establishments within the same 5-mile radius, all within the previous 22 months. Each complaint described the same architecture: Coleman entering a store without cause, approaching a black female customer, demanding proof of purchase or identification, and continuing the interrogation long past the point where any reasonable basis for it existed. All 3 complaints had been reviewed. All 3 had been closed. 2 were marked insufficient evidence. 1 was marked resolved informally, a designation that, upon closer examination, meant a supervisor had spoken to Coleman. Coleman had nodded, and the file had been put away. None of the 3 women had been contacted after their initial statements were taken. The department statement, released on a Wednesday afternoon, was careful and lawyered to within an inch of its life. It acknowledged the complaints. It acknowledged the footage. It used the phrase "does not reflect our values" twice in 4 paragraphs. It announced that Officer Richard Coleman had been placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of a full disciplinary review. The termination came 8 days later. A single paragraph, released at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday, again, the kind of timestamp that hopes the news will soften overnight. It didn't, because by then, Gabrielle Hayes' attorneys had already filed the civil suit. 42 pages, meticulously sourced, 3 prior complaints attached as exhibits. The number at the top of the document read $6 million. The city settled on a Tuesday, 41 days after the footage dropped, 33 days after the suit was filed, and approximately 19 days after the city's own legal team reviewed the 3 prior complaints and quietly advised that a courtroom was not where they wanted this to go. $6 million. No admission of wrongdoing, the standard language, the predictable shield. But Gabrielle's attorneys had negotiated something the city hadn't anticipated losing: a mandatory third-party audit of the department's retail patrol practices, binding policy changes governing officer conduct in private commercial spaces, and a requirement that all 3 of the prior complainants be formally notified of the outcome and offered restitution from a separate fund. The city wanted a signature and silence. Gabrielle gave them the signature. The silence was never part of the negotiation. 6 weeks after the settlement, she testified before the state's Civil Rights Commission, not as a victim reading from a prepared statement, but as a woman who had arrived with data. She brought the 3 prior complaints. She brought retail industry statistics on black consumer discrimination. She brought a study commissioned by her own firm in the weeks following the incident, surveying 2,400 black women about their experiences in luxury retail spaces. 81% reported being surveilled, questioned, or made to feel unwelcome in stores where they were paying customers. She spoke for 40 minutes. The room was silent for most of it. The fund she launched the following month was called The Receipt, a name that needed no explanation to anyone who had followed the story. It provided legal support and advocacy resources for Black shoppers who had experienced retail discrimination and didn't know they had options. Within its first 90 days, it had received over 1,200 intake forms from across the country. And on a quiet Thursday morning, 3 months after Officer Richard Coleman had walked through those glass doors uninvited, Gabrielle Hayes walked back through them. Same cream coat, same pearls, same unhurried stride. Diane Forsyth met her at the entrance, with the new collection already pulled. She stayed for 2 hours. She made 3 purchases. She left with her head exactly where it had been when all of this started, high, forward, unbroken. Some people are made smaller by what happens to them. Gabrielle Hayes had taken 11 minutes and 34 seconds of someone else's worst instincts and built something lasting from it. That is not a story about what was done to her. That is a story about what she did with it. If this story moved you, if it made you think or remember or reach for your phone to share it with someone who needed to hear it, then it has already done part of its work. The other part is yours. Like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Every story we tell is someone's truth that deserves to be heard. Don't let it get buried. Share this one.